Hey, everybody. My name is Sean Pitcher. I am your host of the Roots podcast. Today, we have on Dr. Corbit Franks. He is the assistant professor and clinical educator coordinator of athletic training at the University of Mississippi, or like we like to say, hotty toddy, Ole Miss. Me and Corbett worked together when I was there doing a GA position I did 1 year Ph.D. work. So we know each other very well. And I thought it'd be awesome to have him on as our first athletic trainer on the podcast. Welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. I appreciate you bringing me in, man. It's an honor to be here and be a part of this.
Absolutely. And I think you're going to be able to give us a lot of great insight, not only about practicing as an athletic trainer in real time, but also with some of your new shifts that you've gone with the professor and educator route too. So I think our viewers and other athletic trainers will be able to get an idea of kind of how both those realms work. And if they want the opportunity to end up shifting to a role like that, kind of how can we get to that point? But before we start all that, we talked kind of before we jumped on here. I think you have a really good story. Can you just tell us who is Corbit Franks?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I told you before, man, to tell you who I am and to tell you who I am as an athletic trainer really goes back a long way. I usually start this story all the way back in 8th grade. I was playing football. I grew up, athletics was a huge part of my life. I wasn't the best athlete, but I loved it. Played from, the time I was, I think 5 years old, I started playing baseball and football and played all the way through. But when I was in the 8th grade, I rounded the corner, made what I thought was a spectacular block, only turned back around to the huddle and realized my arm was dangling. I couldn't feel it at all. Just terrible pain in my wrist. So I run to the sideline. Unfortunately, at that point, we had no athletic trainers in my area. We had an EMT that was on the sideline, and EMTs are great, but, athletic injuries are not their specialty. He looked at me, looked at the coach, was like, oh, he'll be fine. He's just got a bruise, and tried to send me back into the game. Fortunately, even as an 8th grader, I had enough intelligence to know something's not right. I cannot go back into this game. My dad comes down from the stands. He's like, are you sure? Because as soon as you say you can't go, you're done for the day. I'm like, I'm done for the season. What are you talking about?
My arm is dangling. What do you want me to do? I can't. I mean, I've seen people, because obviously I play football too. I've seen people going and they're just one arming it, but the amount of damage that could occur after that point, it's not worth it.
Right. And so they take me to the emergency room. Ends up, I snapped my wrist right at the growth plate. They're trying to figure out, do they just reduce the fracture? Do they need to do surgery? Is my left arm going to be shorter for the rest of my life? They don't know at this point. Fortunately for me, they were able to reduce the fracture. It didn't take any surgery or anything like that. But I think that's the point where I fell in love with athletic injuries. And I had a goal to become someone. I didn't know who at that point, because like I said, we didn't have athletic trainers for me to have an example, but I wanted to become someone who was there for athletes in their time of need. As I progressed through high school, we still didn't have an athletic trainer, but I started doing some research and knew I didn't want to be an orthopedic surgeon. Surgery didn't really sound up my alley, and I really didn't know if I was smart enough for that or not. But I started doing research into sports medicine and physical therapy and athletic training. And I kind of delved into both worlds and realized that athletic training was for me. It was, I got to move and shake and be on the field. And it was great for my ADD too, because, always something new. I actually went to school my freshman year. I was supposed to play football. Decided, you know what? I'm not going to play football. I'm not going to beat my body up for few more years and then be kicked out of athletics. I'm going to go become an athletic trainer, and I can stay around athletics as long as I want at that point. So I go to this school. They're like, yeah, we have athletic training. I get there. They had one athletic trainer who didn't even let me shadow him and put me in sports management. Sorry. So after that year, I went back home to Memphis and kind of took a year at University of Memphis, just taking some core classes, so to speak, and figuring out how to get into an athletic training program. Fortunately, I was able to get in an athletic training program at Union University. At that time, it was a small NAI school. but had a really great academics. So I went there, I invested the next couple of years. I get out thinking I'm going to tackle the world, D1, NFL, something. I was going to be the first one from my program to go to big school. Well, unfortunately, that last semester, every big school turned me down, said I didn't have enough big school experience. Coming from a small program, I was going to, be starstruck. I was going to, I didn't have the connections. I didn't have this. I didn't have that. So after being turned down several places, one including Ole Miss for a graduate assistantship, I felt something when I came here. It told me this is where I was supposed to be. So I just reached out to some of the football staff and said, look, I'll come volunteer. I'm tired of getting told I don't have the experience. I'll come volunteer for the next year and just try and get the experience. So they said, come on, you can work football camp. So I worked football camp, not knowing if I was going to continue working after football camp. Well, then it was like every week I just kept coming back, kept working really, really hard. About halfway through the year, they even called me one point. They're like, hey, can you come back early? So-and-so is getting married and we have a huge recruiting weekend and we need an extra set of hands. I'm like, cool, yeah, let's do it. So I come back early after Christmas break and help with a bunch of recruiting events. Then they're like, you know what? We might be able to add you on as like an intern next year. I'm like, okay, whatever. I at this point, I'm starting to get to where I need a job. Well, then they come back and said, hey, you know what? The AD said we're not going to add any more interns, but we're going to add a full-time position. But unfortunately, because it's full-time, you got to apply like everybody else. So I applied. And fortunately, they looked at my resume from the last year, like what I'd done every single day, that job interview of coming in and tackling it every day. And I got hired on full time as an athletic trainer with track and field here at Ole Miss. And, when I was full time, I finished my master's. I started my Ph.D. and finished that. I worked 5 years with track and field. And then I worked 6 seasons with soccer. And I think those two sports really, my base of football made me a little bit more aggressive of an athletic trainer in the track and field world and in the soccer world than I may have been otherwise. My background in track and field, which was just pure craziness, as you know, it allowed me to develop time management skills. It allowed me to develop a great manual therapy skill set that when I got over to soccer, really helped me, because soccer is kind of like a mashup of football, the contact and the acute injuries. And then you got all this running. So it's like take football and take cross country and slam it into one. That's what I had with soccer. So it really molded who I was. Sorry, go ahead.
That's the great thing about working with multiple sports is just you can take so many components from all those and utilize. I mean, you're not going to utilize everything, but utilize some of those that are going to be transferable over into others.
Absolutely.
I mean, that was like when I was there, right? Like we both know who Dr. Melinda is. I mean, one of the big things that she had told me when I first got there, right? She's like, you've got a lot of football experience, right? Like, that's great. Like, I think you need to get other sports experience. So
yeah.
In that case, it was basketball, it was softball. I worked with golf, just making yourself a well-rounded individual. So when you get into those positions, which I'm assuming most dietitians want to become a director one day, right? Like that's kind of the ultimate goal, is to run your program or you run your own program. But you got to know how all these other sports work, how the coaches interact, what is going on within each sport, right? Like I don't know stuff about golf, but I can go be curious, ask questions, come to practice. Or I know a little bit about baseball, but I didn't know stuff about softball.
Right.
So it's like getting all those different opportunities to work in those sports made me so much more well-rounded. So then it didn't really matter where I went or what coaches I talked to. I had skill sets from all those other different sports that, all right, if this doesn't work and how I used it for football, well, I use this and this for these two sports. Let's try that and see if that works with the kids or the coaches or whatever it may be.
Oh, I mean, 100%. Like now, as then I transitioned as an educator, and that was one of my long-term goals, because I wanted to help students like I was, who, I took the long way to athletic training. I had to kind of like carve it out myself. I wanted to help these students. One, I meet with high schoolers all the time to talk about athletic training and help them. They're like, well, I'm between PT and AT, and I help them like kind of navigate that road. And then now is teaching master's level, I take all those experiences from those different sports and I help talk to people when they're like, well, I don't know what sport I want to work, telling them that same thing, like get the full experience. But then also where it helps is, you said, oh, I didn't know about this sport. I think it's a lost art of in the sports medicine realm, whether that's PT, AT, RD, strength conditioning, like we want to be experts and we are, but you know what? Our coaches are experts on that sport. So like I talk to my students about that all the time, like incorporate your coach. Like, yes, we make the final decision on when somebody returns to play. Yes, we make the final decision on if they're in or they're out. But when you're talking about drills and things like that, like lean on your coaches. They're the expert in soccer. They're the expert in track and field or golf or softball. And that's what creates that huge team aspect. And that's why I really wanted to be on here today. When you introduced me to the Roots podcast, is like you focus on that team aspect. And, we say all the time, like a team is only as good as their weakest link. Yeah. Well, if we want to be the best professional weak side, then we have to have strong coaches support, and we have to have them to lean on to understand what that sport really looks like.
You have to be open-minded going into any situation, right? Like don't act like you 100% know the sport, right? Like I played football, but like the last school was at IMG Academy, right? Pretty much everyone there was either a Division I or played in the NFL or like knew way more than I did. So it's just like sit back, listen, see what they have to say. Don't come in there like a bull and think you're gonna like tell them what to do, because they've got lots of experience also working with lots of other professionals where they could probably give you insight on what's going on at those levels or what those other professionals in sports medicine are doing. Then maybe you have no clue, but if you come in there closed-minded and just think like your way is the only way, it's not going to get the job done.
100%. That's correct.
But I think a couple of points from what you talked about there, I think one thing that's going to be really good for any of the high school any of the high schoolers that you go and talk to specifically about athletic training is just your ability to be persistent. I think a lot of times now, just with the generations coming up, you get one denial and all their eggs in one basket. And it's kind of like the end of the world. It's like, well, what do I do now? Right. Where, you had a plan B, you had a plan C, you had a plan D, right? You got a lot of rejection, but you didn't let rejection hold you back. You continue to keep pushing and moving forward and knowing that somewhere down the line, someone's going to take me, right? Rather than this person doesn't want me, or this is my dream school I want to go to, they don't want me, there's nothing else that I can do, right? So there's always those two different types of mentalities. And I can relate that a lot when I got to school at undergrad, right? I did get really lucky and got an initial strength and conditioning internship, which I have a dual background in, but I didn't start in sports nutrition for probably 2-3 more years, because at the time, there is literally what you said. You don't have enough experience. You don't have enough experience. You're not from a big school. So it's like, if either of us let that happen, who knows where we'd be, but we didn't accept that as the only option is going to be. So it's like, you got to find out what options are out there, what was available. We took advantage of those. That led to other opportunities. And now we're in positions that are ideally where we want to be. Is it the best path? Is it the path we wanted? No, but some of these younger generation, you have to understand, like, not everything's going to be undergrad, masters, get a job in the NFL.
Right.
You're probably going to have some obstacles in between that, where it's not going to be the perfect linear straight path going forward.
Well, athletics in general is never exactly what you want. You always lose games that you shouldn't. You always win games that you shouldn't. It's you have to have that tenacity about you. You have to have that. I'm from Memphis originally, and the Grizzlies, they always said the grit and grind. Like you got to just roll through it, man. Take the punches, and I was dead set that I'd applied to Ohio State, which was an hour from my parents' house. And because they had moved up to Ohio at the time, and I had applied to University of Kansas with football, and I thought I was going to get the University of Kansas football internship and didn't. I could have just stopped there and done what my program director had told me. He was like, there's some high school jobs around here. Get yourself a year of experience and then re-hit the applications. But I I didn't. I wasn't trying to be hard headed, but I knew what I wanted, and I was going to try and take every obstacle head on, and just continue to bet on myself, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I can remember when I was at Pitt State, I was applying to everything and anything. I didn't care if it was a director job, an assistant director. Like, my mentality was, like I just said, someone's gonna say yes. Or if you said no, well, you made a bad decision. Because and I mean, it may sound like cocky from the individual, but like, the fact that you said no motivates me more to prove you wrong, that you didn't make the right choice, because you don't know in a lot of cases, right? Like, I think these big schools sometimes, right, there's tons of other people at D3, D2, NAIA that are excellent practitioners. But just because they don't have that big name behind the resume, right, a lot of times I think it stops some programs from bringing those guys in, or gals in. But like, some of them could be even better than some of the staff that you have on there. So what do you think, in your eyes, why do big schools not choose some of those smaller schools, even though the candidate or the person behind who they are could be terrific at their job?
Yeah. I haven't been on both sides now. I think sometimes it's just the idea that there's so much pressure at the bigger levels. That's the biggest difference. I sometimes think about it like this: like, I would have rather learned my skill set without all the bells and whistles and then adjusted to having the bells and whistles than have had everything and had to adjust down to having nothing. It made me creative with the way that I practiced as an athletic trainer. But the biggest difference, and Union was, for NAIA school, my senior year, I worked with women's basketball, and they had won like 4 out of 5 national championships in a row. So the coach was highly regarded in that realm. I mean, he was a tough coach, and he would put pressure on his players and stuff. But even that pressure of a national championship team didn't even compare to the pressure on like your lower end teams here. I mean, there's pressure at every. I mean, it's not just football pressure, not just basketball, not just baseball. Like, you go all the way down in Division I, there's pressure on the rifle coach. There's pressure on the golf coaches. Like, the pressure is the biggest difference. But I would tell people, just continue to be true to yourself. And if that's what you want, like you said, apply to everyone, because somebody eventually will say yes. Or take a bet on yourself, I've known people that were in similar conditions. So they quit a full-time job to go take a 1-year internship. I met a guy several years ago. He quit his D3 football job and took a 1-year internship with the Cleveland Browns and got hired on full time. Like, if that's what you want, don't back down. Take a bet on yourself. Yeah. Sometimes you take a cut in pay, you take a title cut, but like, if you think you're going to parlay it into something bigger, then go for it.
Yeah. I mean, I had a similar experience there. I went to, when I was at Pitt State in the summer, in comparison from like D2 to D1, right? Like, the kids didn't come back to a little bit later for football. So I had just asked the strength coach there, like, hey, I'm going to go visit some college, like Division I colleges in the area, Tulsa, Mizzou, right? Places that were within I'll go anywhere within a 4-hour radius just to go shadow for a day and visit. And like, the one time I went to Mizzou, that led to a 3-month football sports nutrition intern position. Right. And then just having that on my resume for 3 months working with football, even that little bit amount of time opened up more doors. Did I drive 3.5 hours there? Yes. Was it only for 3 months and I had to relocate and stay with a coach for 3 months in an apartment and sit in a cot? Yes. But those are some of the things, even though you may not want to, it's not going to make you money. It's not the sexiest or funnest thing at that time. Like, it's just, sometimes those opportunities are ones you have to kind of just take hold of and get you to project to where you want to go.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I've found in my life, I think it's becoming a little cliche, but I found it true in my life over and over again, in some of my friends' lives. When you're uncomfortable is when you grow the most. Mm-hmm. When you're sitting there comfortable and good, if you really look at it, you're probably not growing that much. But when you're uncomfortable is when you grow the most.
Exactly. You got to continue to find ways to challenge yourself. So kind of the next thing I want to roll into is, obviously what is an athletic trainer, kind of first and foremost, so the viewers just get to understand like what your job actually entails. Cause I know that from profession to profession, I know sometimes there can be confusion or a lot of overlap in some areas. So let's start there, and then we can kind of roll into, how your experience was having that hands-on experience as a actual athletic trainer versus kind of your role on how that shifted now being an actual clinical educator.
Yeah. So one of my ways to kind of talk about an athletic trainer comes from a former boss of mine. He's an executive associate AD here at Ole Miss now. He dubs the athletic trainer as the quarterback of the sports medicine team. Okay. So they're the one that's kind of right there with the team at all the time. Like you said, when you were an RD here, you were working with several different teams. You're kind of bouncing around. Strength coaches work with several teams. The athletic trainer, they're with them, every step of the way. And even if you work with multiple teams, you're still doing pre-practice, post-practice, rehabs. You're the one going to surgery with them. So athletic trainer is kind of the quarterback of the sports medicine team. We're in charge of the athlete's overall health and well-being. And we have a team of people that we work with that are all equally important. Some people would look at it and say, well, the quarterback's the most important. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying the quarterback's the most important, but what I'm saying is we're with them every step of the way. We kind of make those calls of getting them to the other members of the team because the other members of the team always don't have direct access to them. So we're in charge of the overall health and well-being. Athletic trainers go through a very specific medical model education. Now it's at the master's level. It's 2 full years, usually summer, fall, spring, of intense clinical hours and didactic coursework to teach them to be the expert in medical emergencies, musculoskeletal injuries. So we're kind of there to really be with the athlete, assess the situation, and decide whether or not it's something that we can deal with in-house or we need to bring in another member of the sports medicine team to help with this injury, illness, whatever it is.
Yeah. And I would say, the fact that you're saying that you guys are the quarterback of the team, that makes a lot of sense, because a lot of times, like, you're almost at the right hip of the coach the majority of the time, because you're making a lot of the decisions, whether they can play, not play, they're limited, they could do so many, let's say football, so many snaps, or they could spend so many minutes on the court or the field, whatever it may be. And a lot of times, right, a lot of that information is coming in from strength to you or the dietitian to you, and then vice versa. Because if you're, let's say, as close to the coach in comparison to some of those other professions, your message may come through a lot clearer than maybe the dietitian or the strength coach. Now, obviously, those dynamics are all going to be different from place to place, but I can definitely see where you're coming from with that terminology you're using.
Yeah. It's like I said, you may not be at practice that day to give your update to the coach. So like you said, you relay it through me or through the athletic trainer. Again, that doesn't make the athletic trainer more important than you. You have a very important role. You're equally as important, but it's just the ability that the athletic trainer is at every practice. And I think it's, we're still battling as a profession, getting confused with personal trainers and things like that. But we are a healthcare professional, like I said, that goes through intensive coursework on musculoskeletal evaluation, emergency management. And all of our programs are undergo strict accreditation standards. So it is a medical model. And we utilize that clinical experience and didactic coursework to put out very qualified healthcare practitioners.
And I think that the tough thing with social media is so many people are getting confused now, right? Like, oh, hey, you're the nutritionist, or you have the strength coach, like and they confuse it for both. Like, you're the personal trainer or the strength coach is the personal trainer. It's like,
yeah,
you, myself, I mean, our programs, and I'm going to be bringing out one of my former professors who's going to kind of go more into the sports nutrition programs to explain that path, but they have also shifted to now having to get their master's. So if you're looking at like us as professionals are having to get more and more education to be able to even keep up to the standard of practice that we have to display and have to be able to do and know to provide the best care essentially to the athlete.
Right.
Which obviously universities and those organizations are pushing for that to happen.
Yeah, I think if you look at it, if you want to continue to sit at the table with other medical professionals, like you have to meet those same standards.
Mm-hmm.
Physical therapy is a DPT. Occupational therapy is going is transitioning to the doctorate route. You know, nurse practitioners are transitioning. So if you want to continue to sit at the table with the big boys, so to speak, like you better make sure that your profession is doing everything possible to stay highly qualified.
Absolutely. Can you kind of explain us like what's a day in the life of an athletic trainer look like? I know, and I know anyone who's listened has been in athletics, like every day is going to be completely different. You could have the most normal low key day, or you could have the most craziest day and 1,000 people are asking you questions. But just so everyone kind of gets an insight, like what does it look like for you if you were in that position?
Yeah, like you said though, I mean it's all over the place. It's crazy, it's different. I used to tell people if I was bored during a soccer game, I didn't do much that day, that was a really successful day to me. Any it's bored, that was a really successful day because that means nobody got injured. But no, a typical day for me when I was in the clinical setting, you know, I would get in somewhere around 6 or 6:30. I would prep my rehabs and treatments. Athletes would start coming in, no later than 6:45 if they had an 8 o'clock class. We would do rehabs in the morning. Anybody who was on the injury report, I required to come in to morning treatments. That way I could see them, get my hands on them, put my eyes on them, give coach an update before practice. We typically practice somewhere around 10 or 11. So I wanted to be able to see them, get a little gap where I could go down and talk to the coach, give him updates on anybody who's on the injury report. And then we would start pre-practice treatment. So these are people that weren't really injured, but they wanted anything to help prep them for practice. We'd do that from, 9 to 11, taping, all that stuff, practice from like 11 to 1, come back in, do post-practice treatments, typically grab something to eat after that. Some days we'd have weights after practice. If that was the case, practice didn't go quite as long. And then I would do, paperwork, any prep for the next day until that afternoon. Sometimes in the afternoon, we'd have players come back for individuals and stuff like that. So when I was with soccer, my day started a little bit early and finished about 5 or so. Other sports, I might start early and go late. Might do both, might start a little later. My favorite days were game days. Game days are just fun in general. I'd come in a little bit later. We always did like a staff lunch. We'd go somewhere, have lunch, come back in. I'd start setting up the field, and I just kind of take my time and enjoy the moment. And that's the biggest thing I'd tell anybody that wants to get into athletic training and wants to become an athletic trainer. Enjoy the moments. Like that's what I really tried to do on game day, was like enjoy every setup. Like I didn't try and look at it as a monotonous thing. And I'm not trying to be this hyper positive guy, but you never know when your last time of doing that is. And my last season, I knew I was finished with my Ph.D. I knew there was a chance that I could be switching to the academic side at some point. So I really tried to enjoy all of those moments and take it in, because how many people in this world would love the opportunity to work in athletics day in, day out? Like, no matter how crazy it is, we really are the lucky ones to get to experience the inside of athletics. So yeah, that's kind of what my day looked like. And again, I kind of turned that a little bit, but just to say, like, enjoy all those little moments, enjoy those time with your team, because those are the things that I miss the most and the things that I remember most.
And that was a key thing I learned from our past strength coach where I was at previous to where I am now is come into the building, have a smile on, bring good energy, have good body language, because everything you do is going to directly roll over to the athletes, right? And especially someone like yourself or a strength coach, right? You're around the athletes a lot. You talk to them a lot, you hear a lot, right? So if you're not in a good mood or you're not bringing that sauce like they need, so that way they're going to be in a good mood to go out into the pitch in your case, like that can, in some cases for some athletes, derail them. Like if you're bringing bad energy, well, now they're going to be in a bad mood. And
Yeah.
now that's going to affect the coach. That's going to affect their teammates. That's going to affect their play. And it could be a literal domino effect at times.
Yeah. I used to make it in every effort to, if I wasn't feeling it that day, like I didn't want anybody on the outside to know it. Like just keep that in. And it's not to say, I mean, we're all human, like we can all have bad days, but I would try and keep a good front on, just like you said, because there can be such a domino effect.
Mm-hmm. And then can you briefly kind of go into your role and how you've transitioned now into a clinical educator and how that's been different from obviously being more so hands-on to now kind of hands-off and now teaching the next generation coming up?
Yeah, man. So it is a lot different. I first, I think a lot of people when they transition out of athletics and that's become your entire identity, even though like finishing my Ph.D. and getting a faculty position was something I worked for so long, I kind of, I felt like I lost my identity a little bit. But slowly but surely, my students have become my team. They're the people that I invest in. In athletics, I used to say that my entire job, my entire purpose, the whole reason I was there because of athletes. Now, my purpose and the reason I'm here is for my students. Like I said, I'd always wanted to be that person that could help them meet their goals, teach them from my mistakes, make sure that they didn't have to go through the paths that I went through. So I'm able to do that every day. I'm able to take my clinical skill set, like you said earlier, I'm the clinical education coordinator. So I'm able to take my contacts and my skill sets and help put them in successful clinical education spots, to help them become as successful as possible. It's a lot of fun seeing them get these little wins every day. Is like maybe something's hard for them. And we have a really close, tight-knit faculty here where like, they're not getting it from me, I'm like, hey, Heather, can you explain this to this person? And maybe she explains it in a different way. And then I get to see that small little win that student was able to like have that aha moment, I like being able to take my experiences from being a clinical athletic trainer, including the negatives, like the things I messed up on, because I'm the type of person that like, I remember my mistakes, not to be so hard on myself, but to make sure that I don't make those same mistakes again. And I take those mistakes and I embed them into the classroom to try and help each of these students avoid those little things. We're always going to make mistakes, but if we can learn from those mistakes or learn from others' mistakes, that's really important to me. And just being able to translate that hands-on experience. One thing I saw, there's a difference in generation, like communication wasn't as good from some younger staff and people that I like, immersion students that I had and things like that. So it's really important to me to show them that, like show them how to communicate with physicians, how to communicate with other members of the sports medicine staff, how to communicate with coaches. So those are kind of the things that I focus on now. But it's just so important for me to take my clinical experience and fully embed it in the classroom. We have to teach standards. We have to teach from the book. You have to make sure that they pass their board of certification exam. But it's so important to go beyond that for me and really embed that clinical experience I have into the everyday classroom.
Yeah, you're trying to pass on as much information that you can that you've learned, and like you said, we want them to make mistakes at times because they're going to have to be in positions where they're going to have to learn from the mistakes. Like we can't put them in a position where they feel like they're going to be perfect all the time, because that's not possible. Even though some may have that mentality. But I think it's obviously really great what you're doing there. The fact that we can be able to give back more. I mean, even like myself, when I was at my last conference, like I felt like I had this kind of in between where I was able to have these high level discussions with other practitioners in the field, but there's also students or like intro level dietitians that were coming in the field where now like I'm starting to pass down some of the information I was able to learn. So then hopefully their process is a little more efficient, or there's lots of programs and opportunities out there that many people don't know, depending on the country that they're in, depending on the professors or the staff that they work under. So it's just sharing those ideas, sharing those opportunities, and hopefully that gives them a little bit more of a leg up, or a little bit better opportunity. So they don't have to, I don't want to say quote unquote struggle as much, but kind of make it more of a streamlined process rather than not knowing what the direction is. Cause I mean, sound like you've had a little bit of that. I had a little bit of that myself. You know, it's like I came from a background where I was the second person in my family to go to college, and there was no one really telling me where to go, what to do, what site to click on, and kind of what the path was. So I had to ask a lot of questions, communicate a lot, and that's kind of what we're being able to give back now to them, so they can do that on their end too.
Absolutely, man. I mean, it's yeah, it in as you go through it, like you said, just passing that knowledge down. And two, for me, it's like moments like this and going to different conferences, like you said, and seeing I get to advocate for a profession that I love. When you asked who I am, athletic training is at the core of that. And being able to continually every day like try and work to advance the profession and make it better on the future practitioners, it's just, I mean, it's awesome. It's a lot of fun and it's a good feeling.
I think that's the most probably gratifying thing is when you have, let's say in our case, an athlete come back, or in your case now you have a student come back and they're like, this made a huge difference, or this got me there, or what you said 5 years ago got me onto this path. And it's like, those are the little wins for us, where the years of struggle and constantly trying to get points across to people, like you're like, all right, they got it. They understood. Like I
Yeah.
did do something in that moment for that person that made them make a decision that now ended up pushing them in a direction where now they're going to be successful in their path. And that's
Yeah.
that's the best thing you can ask of anyone that's trying to educate from an athlete perspective or a student perspective.
Yeah. And I'm in a really cool situation right now where one of my former athletes is now my student.
Isn't that nuts?
Really cool, man. Cause I mean, she told me, seeing my love for it every day helped her as an athlete, but also made her want to do this. So like I got to treat her and help her through a lot of really hard times as an athlete when I was her athletic trainer. And then now I'm able to help her like grow as a professional and see her, taking those steps. And I mean, that's a really cool situation.
It's just crazy how it comes full circle.
Yeah.
But Corbett, really appreciate you coming on. Lots of awesome nuggets for anyone that's an athletic trainer listening to this, or just anyone in general in an athletic department that's trying to get more of an understanding of what your athletic trainer does. Go ask them questions, like have an organic conversation like this, because the better you get to know the person behind the name of the credentials, the better you'll have, the better interdisciplinary team you're going to essentially have to be able to essentially, what we all want to do is serve the athlete. So Corbett's contact information, his bio, all that I'll include obviously in the show notes. So if you want to contact him through those different paths, you'll be able to. All my information on there as well. Again, I want to try to get as many practitioners as we can to continue this on. But Corbett, really appreciate you coming on. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, man. I appreciate you having me. It was a lot of fun.